In the early 2000s, the Blackfoot River in Montana stood on the edge of ecological catastrophe. Despite millions of dollars spent, 12,000 acres of wetlands had turned into dry fields and ditches. Then something unusual happened. The solution turned out not to be building new infrastructure, but letting nature do what it had done for thousands of years. Soon, beavers began appearing in the valley, along with new dams and water where there had been none for decades. What happened next changed how Montana thinks about water. So what exactly did they do? Looking at the Blackfoot Valley from the air in the 1970s, it appears orderly, level rectangular fields, sharp canal lines, the geometry of productivity. This is what land looks like after it has been reshaped for human needs. From 1940 to 1960, hundreds of meters of clay and concrete drainage pipe were laid beneath these fields. Rivers were straightened and pushed to the edges of the valley, freeing the floodplain for haying. Bogs were drained. Pastures became productive, dry, suitable for business. It looked like progress, and for a time it was. The problem did not arrive immediately, but gradually, through physics nobody had anticipated. A straightened river carries water much faster than a natural one, because it no longer spends energy on bends, no longer spreads across the floodplain, and no longer seeps into the ground. Faster water cuts deeper, and the channel gradually deepens. When the channel deepens by 1 meter, the water table on both sides drops with it by 3 meters. Meadows that had lived for millennia on spring flooding found themselves above the water even in rainy years, not because there was less rain, but because the water was no longer being held where it needed to be. Trout need cold water, no higher than 12 degrees Celsius in summer, or the fish lack oxygen and die. The bogs had provided that cold water. They cooled the tributaries, slowed the flow, and held the temperature down even in heat. When the bogs disappeared, the tributaries began warming in summer, and the trout population in the Blackfoot began falling, not sharply, but year by year, unnoticed until it became obvious. In 1992, American Rivers included the Blackfoot for the first time on its annual list of the country's most endangered rivers. The same river that Norman Maclean had described in his 1976 book so vividly that people came here with fishing rods after reading it, and even more so after Robert Redford's 1992 film. The river from the legend was slowly disappearing, and most people around it did not yet understand that. By the mid-2000s, 12,000 acres of former floodplain remained in the valley, land that remembered water but had not received it in decades. Beneath every field, buried pipes continued drawing off moisture. Above every channel, banks stripped of willows crumbled into the river and silted over the spawning gravel. The technical question here was secondary. The primary one was different. Most of these 12,000 acres belonged to private owners, and no government biologist could enter someone else's land without permission. The Blackfoot Challenge, a nonprofit coordinating work in the valley since 1993, solved this problem the only way that could work here, through conversation, not coercion. Rather than demanding that ranchers sell or hand over land, the challenge offered voluntary agreements. You remain the owner, you keep grazing cattle, but you agree to allow restoration work on your land, and the Federal Partners for Fish and Wildlife program covers part of the cost. Jim Stone, a rancher from Ovando and one of the first to sign such an agreement, would later say, "We stopped complaining about what we couldn't do. We decided to talk about what we could. But persuading people who feed their families off this land was far harder than signing papers. Some ranchers refused outright. Strangers want to come onto my land, dig up my fields, and promise that in a few years there will be a bog here again. A bog that will personally get in the way of my grazing. No thank you." The challenge didn't push or insist. It waited. It showed results on neighboring parcels and came back a year later. On Wasson Creek, a small tributary, restoration worked quickly. Water temperature dropped within a single season and trout returned. That was an argument you could point to, but such quick examples were rare. Most parcels simply became wetter after restoration, and for years nothing spectacular happened. When agreements were finally signed, detective work began. Teams of Fish and Wildlife Service biologists walked walked the fields with probes, literally feeling through the ground for hidden pipes. A drain buried in the 1940s was still pulling water out of the bog, and sometimes the ranch owner did not even know where it ran. They would find it, mark it, dig it up, and block it. Neudecker coordinated this work from the start. As a Fish and Wildlife Service biologist, he could only enter land he was invited onto. So each new agreement meant, literally, a new piece of land he could walk and observe. By 2007, enough such parcels existed in the valley to start seeing the difference between them and neighboring unrestored fields. On restored land, sedge returns within the first 2 years. Willows along the channel begin taking root and holding the banks instead of crumbling. Gravel and spawning areas gradually clears of decades of accumulated silt. It is not spectacular, but it is movement in the right direction, and Neudecker could see it. But between the signing of the first agreements in the early 2000s and what Neudecker would see at Hoyt Creek in 2010 stood a drought. Jim Stone had signed an agreement among the first and had already allowed part of his fields at Rolling Stone Ranch to be dug up when it struck. 8 years, from 2000 to 2008, the worst in the valley in half a century. Restored sections dried out along with unrestored ones. Trout populations fell even where channel bends had just been restored and drains blocked. Ranchers who had already let their fields be dug up watched restored bog turn back into dry meadow. The owner of a parcel on Nevada Creek called the challenge in the 3rd year of the drought. Not to complain, he simply said, "I look at that field every day. There is nothing there," and hung up. The challenge called back the following week, came out in person, and showed water temperature data from the tributary. It had dropped by 1.4 degrees even in the driest year. Invisible to the eye, but trout notice it and stay closer. The rancher listened, nodded, and said nothing. But he did not tear down the dam. That is the entire Blackfoot Challenge model in a single episode. Not persuading with fine words, but showing data and waiting. In a valley where ranches pass from father to son, trust builds just as slowly as a bog, layer by layer, season by season. The drought ended in 2008. Groundwater levels on restored parcels rose first, a few weeks earlier than on unrestored ones. The difference was a matter of centimeters, but those centimeters decide whether sedge sprouts or dry clay remains. Spring 2010. Greg Neudecker arrived at a parcel the documents called the Hoyt Creek Project, 420 acres of fen, a particular type of bog fed by mineral-rich groundwater, rare and nearly gone from the valley. What had stood here for decades looked like an ordinary meadow, level, dry, suitable for grazing. Beneath it ran an old drainage pipe network carrying water off to the river. Neudecker's team blocked the pipes, filled the ditches, and simply gave the water nowhere to go. The following spring, Neudecker came back and saw long-billed curlews on the restored parcel, birds not seen in this part of the valley for a long time. They were nesting. This meant one thing: the bog had not been dead. It had been waiting for the water to return, and waiting in the right places, in the seeds, in the soil's microbial cultures, in the memory of the landscape. The Hoyt Creek Project became the first documented proof that restoring the Blackfoot Valley's hydrology truly brought back vanished species. But the thing neither Stone nor Neudecker had anticipated was bigger still. Nobody had planned for beavers. Castor canadensis had inhabited the Blackfoot Valley for thousands of years, as long as the trout and the willows. By the 19th century, the fur trade had wiped it out almost everywhere across the American West. Then it began returning, but slowly and only where conditions allowed still or slow water where building was possible. In a drained valley of straight channels and pumped dry bogs, there was nothing for it to do. When the drainage was blocked and water began collecting, beavers appeared on their own, with no plan from any human. But they didn't appear for no reason. They came where conditions existed. and people had created those conditions through their work. The first thing they did was start building dams exactly where the old drainage ditches had been, where water was already accumulating. Each dam creates a pond. Each pond raises the groundwater table by meters on either side of the channel. More groundwater moisture means more willows. More willows means more material for new dams. More dams means more ponds. This cycle is self-sustaining, and there's no longer any need to stop it. By Fish and Wildlife Service biologists estimates, a single beaver does work that would take a human crew several weeks. But it's not only about the volume of work. It is about what a beaver pond does to temperature. Water in a pond moves slowly, contacts the banks and bottom, becomes saturated with cold groundwater, and exits into the river noticeably colder than it entered. Where tributary water once warmed to 18 to 20 degrees in summer and trout left, a beaver pond brought the outflow temperature down to 12 to 14. The fish came back. Jim Stone, who stood by the first beaver dam on his land and watched the pond slowly spread across former pasture, would put it this way: "When you see it work, it's the coolest thing you'll ever run into." But a beaver doesn't ask permission. It builds where it wants. Several operations in the valley have already run into a beaver pond flooding part of a pasture or blocking an access road. Legally, a rancher has the right to tear down the dam. Practically, doing so means destroying the very thing the whole effort was for. The challenge teaches non-lethal methods of coexistence. Special flow control pipes threaded through a dam let you manage the pond's water level. The beaver doesn't sense a leak because it can't hear or see where the water is going, and so doesn't try to plug it. It works, but it requires time, money, and above all, trust between rancher and organization. Trust that took 30 years to build. And still, back to Jones Lake. This is a lake on Jim Stone's ranch, the same Rolling Stone Ranch where he grazes cattle and where he had let his fields be dug up a few years earlier. He stood beside Neudecker that morning in the spring of 2009. Both watched the water. To understand what was happening there, you need to know one number. In 1932, a National Park Service census found 69 trumpeter swans across all 48 states, all of them near Yellowstone. A species that had once numbered in the millions across the continent had been reduced to 69 by the fur trade and demand for white feathers for hats. The last documented record of a trumpeter in the Blackfoot Valley dates to 1806. Meriwether Lewis saw them in the Clearwater Valley and noted it in his journal. Then, 200 years of silence. In 2005, Greg Neudecker, together with the Blackfoot Challenge, launched a reintroduction program. Each year, young birds were brought from aviaries in Wyoming and released onto Jones Lake. Each release drew around 140 people, school children from 6 Valley schools, local residents, teachers. Each person was handed a bird to hold. Ovando school teacher Kara Brigham sat in a folding chair by the shore holding a 9-kilogram, 1-year-old trumpeter. The bird wrapped its long neck around hers and went still. That's exactly how swans are calmed before release, by letting them feel stillness and warmth. Neudecker walked among the people, reminding them, if the bird goes limp, don't let go. Swans can feign death, a defensive reflex, after which they take flight the instant the threat looks away. Then he counted to 3. The women rose, walked to the water, leaned over it, and opened their arms. From the surface, a splash, the crack of wings, a chorus of honking. 140 people held their breath at once, and then someone laughed with joy. Brigham later showed 2 scratches on her shirt sleeves from the claws. "I'm not throwing this shirt away," she said. Ever. But 2008 nearly buried the entire program. The female from the first pair to settle in the valley flew into a power line and died. The male was left with 3 eggs. A farmer who stumbled on the nest called the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The eggs, carried in a bucket of hay, were taken to surrogate swans in the Mission Valley, and all 3 survived. That summer, the male led the cygnets through the bog alone, and in autumn took them south for winter. Locals simply called him the widower. Neudecker knew that young swans without parents often fail to find their route and die the first winter. So in the spring of 2009, he came to the lake and simply waited. He came back. By 2022, 10 pairs of trumpeters were nesting in the Blackfoot Valley. 8 of those nests that season were successful, producing 30 cygnets in a single season. Some pairs began nesting in the neighboring Swan Valley, where nobody had invited them. Jack Caton, the biologist who had helped Neudecker monitor nests from the start, would say that they are like ambassadors for wetlands. They help people realize the importance of these habitats. Others returned too. Mallards appeared in places they had not been seen in for decades, along with Baltimore orioles, sandhill cranes, and several shorebird species that had been absent from the valley since the 1960s. Trout holed in tributaries where beaver ponds cool the water to the right temperature. 91,000 acres of private land are protected by voluntary conservation easements. The land remains in ranchers' hands, and not a single parcel was compulsorily acquired. 660 partners coordinate through the Blackfoot Challenge, with more than 40 tributaries restored or in progress. Neudecker received the Intermountain West Joint Venture Award in 2015, but the citation was not about the birds. It was about his ability to talk to ranchers, because without that, nothing else would have existed. The Blackfoot is an island. Across the rest of the American West, drainage continues. Climate models predict less snow in the mountains, which means less water in the valleys. In 2024, the Blackfoot recorded its lowest level in 30 years. The restored wetlands are under threat again, only now not from drainage ditches but from a lack of snow. And without snow, there will not be beavers. Their dams will remain, but empty. Yet in 2024, the Montana Conservation Corps alone installed 2,586 artificial beaver dams across the state. What began as a local experiment has become a standard.